Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Economic Development Authority. Tonight is Monday, June 24th. Audra, can you have the record show that all council members are present along with the city planner and the city administrator? Our first item of business is to consider approval of the minutes, item 2.1 from January 13th, 2020.
Mayor.
Yes, Jeff.
I'd like to make a motion to consider approval of minutes or approve minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Jeff, seconded by Tina. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next item is bills and communications. Adam?
Commissioners, it's hard to get a difference, but commissioners of the EDA, at this point in time, there are no bills for the EDA board to approve.
Okay. Thank you for the update. We will move on to item 4.1, which is officers.
Thank you. So the bylaws of the Economic Development Authority, Article 2, outline that officers of the EDA should be elected. Those positions include a president, a vice president, a treasurer, an assistant treasurer, and a secretary. The bylaws do note that offices of the president, the vice president, and the treasurer shall be members of the board. Historically, someone in Audra's position, city clerk, would be assigned the secretary role for record keeping, signing documents. That's of course up to the EDA, but historically that's been precedent. The president and vice president do need to be separate people. These are not the voting members of the commission. All five of you still vote on everything, regardless of the officer titles. They are outlined in the bylaws that were sent to you last Thursday ahead of the meeting packet. So I can answer any questions. Otherwise, there would be a motion necessary to nominate each of those positions.
Council questions?
Mayor, do we do one at a time or do we just can we make a motion for the 5 positions and then discuss it there?
Commissioners, that can be done either way. If you want to make an individual motion for each of those officer positions, you can do so and vote individually, or if there was a full slate of nominations, you can do it that way as well.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
if I can, council,
Mhm.
I can make a motion for officers. President, Mayor Stockamp, Vice President, Councilmember Gady, Treasurer, Councilmember Dunlap, Assistant Treasurer, Councilmember Morris, Secretary, Clerk Etzel.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Is there any discussion?
Jeff, real quick, who is the assistant treasurer?
Oh, excuse me, Councilmember Morris, Brittany.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, missed that one.
Right? Is there any more discussion or clarification? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Point of clarification, who made the second?
Oh,
did no one second?
no, we started discussing. We have-
I didn't write it down, so I wanted to make sure I didn't miss it.
I wrote Tina down, so.
I wrote Tina down too. I'm sorry.
We're
Honestly, I'm
thinking ahead,
sorry.
right? Perfect.
Second,
Sorry.
Okay.
For a point of clarification, we'll go back. So we have a motion by Jeff. And-
second.
Okay, Tina's making the second. We had clarification on the spots, so it's President Stockamp, alternate is Gady, treasurer is Dunlap, alternate is Morse, and Audra is the secretary. Correct? Did everybody write that down?
Yes, correct.
Okay, we have a motion, a second discussion. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Okay, item 4.2, the official newspaper.
Commissioners, in your packet, there is a resolution designating an official newspaper. In accordance with Minnesota statute, the Star News does fulfill that. That is the same paper used for official city notices as well. So resolution 2024-01 would designate the Star News as the official newspaper of the EDA for 2024.
Okay. Any questions on that, or a motion would be in order?
Mayor, I'll make a motion.
Yes.
Motion to adopt resolution 2024-02, calling for a public hearing on the proposed establishment. Is that right?
01.
Wrong item.
Sorry,
one.
my bad. My goodness. Hold on. Newspaper. I hit the wrong one. Sorry. Didn't sound right. Motion to adopt resolution 2024-01, designating an official newspaper.
Second.
Motion by Tina, seconded by Jeff. Is there any discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
and just to clarify, the Star News as the official newspaper.
That's correct.
Second,
There already was a second.
who seconded?
Jeff.
Jeff did.
Like our first day or something.
It is our first day.
Got nervous and Dave walked in.
Oh, my goodness.
You should have turned the air down earlier. We're all sweltering up here. All right. Is there any more discussion?
No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item 4.3, Economic Development District.
Commissioners, in your packet, there is an RCA that outlines recommendation to adopt a resolution scheduling a public hearing. Within the bed of that memo, there's some details. We do have a memorandum that was included in that from the city's bond council, Taft Law. There is a resolution that was also prepared by Taft for the Board of Commissioners to consider, which would schedule this public hearing. So that document was drafted by Taft. And there's also at the very back of that an Exhibit A, which is a sample notice of the public hearing that will be included in the Star News. We have Jessica Green, the city's municipal advisor from Northland Securities, here to walk you through what a development district is and what the process would be, and answer any questions from the board.
Good evening.
Madam President, and Commissioners, good evening. As Adam mentioned, you do have a resolution before you for consideration to set a public hearing for July 22nd at 5:30 to consider the establishment of an economic development district. This would be to facilitate the issuance of bonds at a time to be determined. So with the staff memo and the memo that came from bond counsel from Taft, it outlines a number of things. Under state law, and the specific statute is 469, it requires that an economic development authority, prior to engaging in the powers of the economic development authority, establish an economic development district in which you're able to operate and utilize all of the powers of 469. And all of those powers are listed out in 469-101. If anyone's interested in reading through that, there's 20 some odd sections in there. But generally speaking, the EDA's powers are quite broad. But again, what you're being asked to consider this evening, and again, meant to facilitate the issuance of bonds at a later date, should the city and the EDA choose to go down that path. That public hearing would simply be to allow that economic development district to be established. You're not taking any action on the bonds this evening or at that public hearing. It's simply to establish that economic development district so that you have the powers of the EDA, and the EDA by statute 469 has the ability to issue revenue bonds. But again, that public hearing to establish the district, is necessary prior to the issuance of debt.
Council questions?
Madam President,
Yes, Ryan.
I just have a few. I was trying to understand what the definition of an economic development district is and what the restrictions are on them. If I could give you a little bit of context. The reason I'm trying to understand that is because in the statute that you mentioned, it says that the authority shall find that an economic development district is proper and desired to establish develop within the city. And I'm not sure what proper would be. I'm trying to understand what it would be for us to vote yes versus no on a development district. Does my question make sense?
Yes. So very plainly, a development district is simply an area that is designated, or a boundary really, enable for the EDA to use its powers, which is the ability to purchase land, lease land. And again, that power is under 469-101, quite lengthy. The ability of the EDA to do the EDA's work within that EDA or that economic development district is again, very, very broad. But in terms of restrictions, I would simply point you back to 469-101, which again lists numerous powers under the EDA Act. So I'm not quite certain how to offer comment on restrictions, again, because the ability of the EDA to utilize those powers is very broad.
Well, I guess where I'm, again, just trying to understand it, is I looked at some of those subdivisions, so we can receive public property under subdivision 9 and 17. We can initiate a foreign trade zone, which is interesting, and we can implement a public parking facility. But all of these seem to point to economic development, right? And I'm having a hard time understanding with the purpose of what we're trying to do here, at least some of us, how does that relate to those items under 101?
Sure, I understand your comment. So when looking at economic development authorities and their ability to establish these districts and complete certain types of projects, really what you're looking at is the ability to create and offer core services that allow the city to grow and support the residents of the city.
Madam Mayor. Jessica, and jobs as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a couple
Oh,
more.
sorry, Ron.
Under the memorandum that we got from Taft, it goes into and I'm trying to understand the differences between the EDA lease revenue bond and the other option that we had, which was the CIP bond. And it states that, Taft states that the city will have the right under the lease each year during the term of the lease to non-appropriate the funds needed for the lease payments and to terminate the lease. If I'm understanding that correctly, a future council could just decide to stop making payments on this. Am I accurate?
You do have the ability to non-appropriate. The council has the ability on an annual basis to non-appropriate.
Okay, and that would in effect cancel the lease?
You would be in default of the lease. I would stress this very, very carefully. To default on an obligation would have considerable impacts to the city for many, many years into the future.
Cities have done it in the past though, right?
There are a few that live in infamy.
Madam Mayor. I would be curious to know what cities actually would default on something like this. And I'd also be curious as to, again, who knows, future, but why a council member would decide to default on something like this. So, just, I would be very curious to see what cities defaulted.
There are two examples that I can give you. Can't comment on the council's opinion to not make that payment to the EDA. Vadnais Heights defaulted on some debt many years ago, and the city of Monticello also defaulted on a lease revenue bond.
Believe, if my memory serves, I'm looking it up right now, but it's not in front of me. The Vadnais Heights ones was, I think, a little over $26 million. I don't know if that
That
sounds
could be
right.
the case. I am not certain.
So along those lines, if the council had decided to go with a CIP bond, can a future council cancel a CIP bond?
No, a bond cannot be canceled. It can be called in at the time of the redemption date or any date thereafter. So effectively you can pay a CIP bond off once that date hits. But no, you cannot cancel a bond.
But sorry, but Jessica, the EDA could restructure the bonds.
Absolutely. So once that optional redemption date hits or any date thereafter, you can certainly call those bonds in, refund them with CIP bonds at that time. And they're, if the city and the EDA determined to continue moving forward, that would be a discussion that you'd want to have about when that call date is. How soon do you want that? Typically, a call date's going to be 7 or 8 years into the future. You can certainly elect to have that call date sooner if the council believes that market conditions will exist in the near term to call those bonds in and refund them.
If we do, sorry, if we do an earlier call date, how much does that increase how much would you estimate that increase the cost?
It really depends. Market moves daily. So at that time, if you're looking at a 4 or 5 year call date, that's going to be different than a 6 or 7 year call date. So it really depends on market conditions. I don't feel comfortable giving you an answer on that.
Fair enough.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Jessica, if you stress the importance of not defaulting on something like this, can you said you strongly advise against that. Can you just maybe tell us what were to happen? What happens with the city if we were to default?
Sure. So first, your credit rating would be ruined.
And Adam, right now, as far as our credit,
Double A plus.
right,
Yep, very strong credit rating for the city.
okay,
You said A to A plus plus.
double A.
Double A
Yep,
plus,
double A
yep. So from there, your ability to issue debt would be tested. Obviously, if a city council is willing to not honor its obligations, investors will know that. So if you are going to issue debt, do you get any bids? Or do you get one and it's what we would refer to as a throwaway bid? You're not expecting anyone else to bid, so you bid very high. Ultimately, that means that the residents of Otsego end up paying a lot more for that debt because the city's credit rating is much worse than it would have been. The other thing that I would keep in mind too is that even if the credit rating drops several notches, which I would anticipate that it would if there was a default, let's say that your rating was an A. I would not expect the city to receive bids that are in line with other similar A-rated cities. And that again is because if you have not honored your obligations, and that is a lease is an obligation. Just because you have the ability to non-appropriate, it's an obligation.
And when you say bids, that means that the city would want to go, they have a project in mind, or maybe we're a community center, I don't know, a larger project down the road. If our credit rating were to go from a double A plus, and let's say we defaulted, how long does it approximately, or how do you rebuild that, shall we say, trust or your credit score or our, does that make sense what I'm asking?
It does.
Okay,
I would say decades.
okay,
Those two examples that I provided, I mean, cities talk about that all the time as sort of a wayward tale, saying, don't go down that path.
sure.
So to make that decision to not pay the lease would be very detrimental to the city. And in no circumstances would I say that the EDA or the city council should move forward with a mindset of it being optional to pay the lease.
We take the loan, it's owed.
Yep.
Mhm.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Sure.
Any other comments?
Just a couple more.
Yeah.
So the idea of defaulting on a loan is interesting because it's the EDA taking out the loan, correct?
Correct.
But it's the city's credit rating that gets affected.
It would also, so let's talk about credit rating.
Okay,
So the city does not have a credit rating. The
Okay.
city's outstanding debt has credit ratings attached to it. So the city and the EDA, if you were going to issue EDA lease revenue bonds, given the size, we would recommend that you pursue a rating for those bonds. So in the case that if there were to be a default of the city not paying a lease, then the EDA would then default. So you're affecting the ability of each body to be able to issue debt into the future. But again, it's looked at as this is an essential facility and the city has determined that it's not going to pay for it and that it's willing to allow the EDA to default on its bonds. So again, it has effects that are beyond the E EDA.
Any other comments?
I guess just maybe a comment. I
Mhm.
think yeah, I spent some time this weekend going over the establishing resolutions and the documents that formed the EDA. And it is clear to me that the purpose of the EDA was to encourage business development. It's in the name. It's the Otsego Economic Development Authority. And I know that the council at the time was concerned about citizen involvement in creating the EDA. And now the current council is using the EDA to avoid citizen involvement and avoid a petition. And I don't think this is a good path to go down. I think what it's going to end up doing is perhaps give the next council no other option but to cancel a lease. And I hope we don't get there, but
And my comments would be to your points, Ryan, that the councils at the time when the EDA was formed used that to build this building, buy property, build the public works building. And it would be very unfortunate if future councils put the city at risk of us building a AA+ rating to choose to not pay. That's not been anything we've ever done in the history of Otsego. We've paid our debts when we've taken them out. This is an essential service that we're looking at. And again, right now, tonight, we're just talking about calling for a meeting in July.
Madam Mayor.
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going for you.
Oh, no.
I was just gonna make a motion. If we were,
Real quick.
Oh.
Dave, if future councils were to default, could residents sue the council for misappropriation of funds?
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm not bond counsel, I'm not a financial advisor. So the non-appropriation clause is a required element of this type of bond. So it's not illegal for the council to do that. It would just be an extremely bad idea and bad for your financial well-being. So I doubt, frankly, that residents could sue the council for utilizing that non-appropriation clause, but it'd just be very bad for the city's financial well-being, for the residents and for the
For years to come.
Right. So that would show that for those who would cancel, that would be basically anti-progress. So right now, where we're at, we need to build, and at 166 years old, it is what it is. Something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I can only tell you about the legal aspects as far as, your vision for the future of the city, those are policy choices for the council, but I know there's been a lot of discussion about, and reports on the need for this facility, so I leave that to the five of you to figure out, but it would not be illegal for the city to utilize this. It would be extremely harmful for the financial well-being
To not pay.
to utilize the non-appropriation clause and default on the lease. And I should also, I guess, just say that I'm not bond counsel, so if you want to ask additional, more detailed questions about this, you probably want to follow up with bond counsel, but that's my opinion as just a general city attorney, not bond specialist.
Commissioner Dahl. I will say in those two cases that I mentioned, litigation was brought forward in both of those cases where default occurred. Don't know the exact specifics of those. Again, they were many, many years ago. But I would expect some type of action by investors if the EDA or the city were to not pay the obligation. Whether that would be successful or not, can't say. It would depend on the circumstances and the details of that decision-making process. But it certainly would be something that you'd want to consider and be prepared to have to defend.
Yeah, I should clarify that. So you asked a question about whether residents could sue the council. And my opinion is no. Whether investors could sue for default on the bond, I think very likely yes. But I'm not a bond expert.
So in that case, the building would go to the lessors, right? The piece of land would stay with the EDA. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Okay.
Not certain of the legalities there, but it would be determined based on the language in the lease.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to adopt resolution 2024-02, calling for a public hearing on the proposed establishment of Economic Development District Number 2 on July 22nd, 2024 at 5:30 PM to be held at the Otsego Prairie Center.
Second.
Motion by Brittany, seconded by Tina. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Madam President. I just want to emphasize that I'm not going to support this. I think if the commission was really concerned about the future of the city and what future councils may do, it should give them another option instead of forcing them to have to cancel a lease. A CIP bond makes a lot more sense in this. It's a lot cheaper. It's more normal to go with the CIP bond. And the only reason that we're even considering an EDA lease revenue bond in this case is because the members of the council don't want the citizens to petition against it. And I think when you try to find loopholes like this, you end up walking into craters. And rather than use the normal procedures, the council decided to try to do acrobatics to avoid a petition from the electorate. And I think the citizens deserve better. So I'm going to be voting against this.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
First, I do not do acrobatics. I think that's very clear. Second, I feel that we are doing this and going this route because it's important for residents in the city as a whole to provide them with public safety. I respect what you're saying, but public safety is key. It's important and we lack in that. And again, it's all about perception and opinion, what you consider to be, shall we say, normal. We're not going about this the normal way. That is, again, perception, because what is normal these days? This is a perfectly logical way to be able to go about building a fire department, an actual building. So that being said, that is all.
Real
I
quick.
would just,
Go ahead, Ryan, finish and then I'll.
I would just say, I don't think that we are improving the economic situation of our residents, our businesses, or our industry by using the more expensive option that takes away the citizens' right to petition. I think that residents and businesses are better served by the existing contracts that are underneath this entire issue. And making it more expensive to have a business in Otsego won't improve economic development. Look at where the fire stations are today in relation to business and industry. They are right next to the existing stations. Putting our municipal fire department in the middle of the city is the worst possible location for business and industry within the city.
How so?
Because they're going to have longer response times than they get today. Look at where business and industry is today. It's where the fire stations are.
This conversation several times and you're wrong on that. You're wrong. Just admit that you're wrong on that. The response times are going to be less. They're going to be more effective. If you think where this fire department's going to be and where I live in Martin Farms, it's going to, even though Albertville is right behind me, Eric took 8 minutes to get to my house. 8 minutes. The fire department wasn't there yet. That was just him and his truck. Our fire department's going to make it there quicker than the Albertville truck because they have volunteers. So don't give me that bull because I'm not buying it. I'm done with this.
You're going to be paying a lot for it.
It's my safety
we-
and my life and my family's life. I will pay $1 million for their life.
It's not your $1 million.
We're real quick, since we're at council, city hall or Prairie Center, in the center of Otsego. If anyone in this room had a health emergency, where's the ambulance coming from? Anybody can comment, please. Where's the ambulance coming from?
We're not taking comments.
Right, but, excuse me,
This
Mayor.
is,
In that case, but 2 to 3 years from now, when we have a building to sell to 3 contracts, 2 miles away. So there's that. Plus, January of 21, I saw Councilmember Morris, Mayor Stonkamp, and I, we swore an oath to Otsego, residents, businesses, as we all know, 3.7 billion in assets. And then in January 23, I saw Council Gady and Council Dunlap swear an oath to Otsego. Right now, we spend money, we subsidize Elk River Fire Departments. There's 3 fire stations. We subsidize Rogers. There's 2. We subsidize Albertville. And we're more than 50% of their money or their fire services. And if you look into history of Otsego, we also subsidize Monticello. So more than 6 fire stations, more than 10 fire trucks, none of it is ours. 16 million by the time this gets built and in full operation. January 1st, 27 is our deadline, not including ambulance. So with that, it's kind of like 166-year-old city as of today's date. By the time this gets done, it'll be a 168-year-old city, and we're still relying on our neighbors. That's not good business, and Otsego's a business. So I'm for getting it done. Plus, when this gets done, when does this go to get our bond, and when do we get to put this to get out for bid?
Commissioners, right now, the schedule would be to send this out for construction bids sometime in the fall, and financing would follow that timeline. Construction would not initiate until the spring of 2025.
So with this, makes it no delay in this fire station. Thank you to all residents, which when you look online from when we were elected, fire station was already on the conversation. So that would delay it from November, give or take winter, and how to do the landscaping on that. We could delay into 27, which then it would guarantee we'd cost. I doubt they'd be like, well, go month to month for all these fire stations. No, they'd be like, we need a year. So that's $2 million extra. We're worried about extra money, and then, whatever. So there's that.
Madam
Right.
President. I just want to make sure, I hope the commissioner previous was not suggesting that we can improve ambulance services by the building of this station, because we have no control over ambulance services.
Madam Mayor, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you were just saying in general public safety, we would have potentially staff that are trained to, and I can't speak for you. I'm not sure if that's what you were saying as
And
far
we
as
have a
safety
site
goes.
For the ambulance to sit here.
When it's
Correct.
built, yeah.
Yes.
And which means they have, 2 have to stay over the night or rest there. There has to be this spot for the ambulance to get in there.
Correct.
If we don't have it, well, we can't sell it. We can't say from Monticello, from Elk River, or from St. Michael, well, we need this here. Well, sorry, there's nothing there.
we're gonna go back to the motion.
Okay.
We're going back and forth. We have a motion and we have a second. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
I,
Motion passes 4-1. Moving on to item 5, old business.
Commissioners, there's nothing on the agenda, but kind of just rehashing some things that the EDA was working on before. There was discussion on broker agreements for the 3 city-owned lots. That's a topic of discussion that we could pick up at a future meeting. There's an economic development strategies and priorities policy that has not been updated since, I believe, 2018. So that's an item that the EDA board could take a look at. We do have a revolving loan program that we talked about at the May 13th budget meeting. There's been an inflow of affordable housing aid that we do have a recent example of one that we may look at presenting. for the EDA or city council. And also a review of the bylaws. So those were last revised in 2013. So that is something the EDA board could direct staff to bring forward to future meetings. Other than that, I have no additional items under old business. So just kind of generating some discussion there. We can pick that up at a future meeting, or staff can bring items and ask for the EDA board to call a meeting.
Sure. Officers, do we want to have Adam go ahead and bring back these items?
Yeah. Please.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'll call that my report section as well.
Okay, I was gonna say, if there's
I
something
guess
different. on the
one
reports.
recent topic that was discussed at a budget meeting, we're still working with a local manufacturing business on expansion and potential purchase of a city-owned lot. So
Okay. Oh. That would be good. All right, if you have nothing else, then a motion to adjourn, right?
Madam President, I think there's a bigger problem here with the meeting.
Okay.
And that is that the EDA has not met in over 4 years. While that may not, well, it may be a problem in and of itself, but what it means is that there's no budget. So the EDA has no money. We are broke. In fact, just by having this meeting, we're putting the EDA into a negative financial situation, which I'm not sure we're allowed to do. Let alone the fact that I'm pretty sure that our financial advisors and bond counsel don't work for free. And the execution of the documents that were passed earlier are going to require some funds that we don't have. Now, I know that the response is likely going to be, well, we'll just take it from the city. But I don't think we can. Looking at the Department of Employment and Economic Development manual on EDAs, it says that the most common practice is a direct general fund appropriation to the EDA out of the city general fund. However, the EDA is required to send its budget to the city council with an estimate of funding requirements for the next fiscal year. And it is through this procedure that a city may give money from the city's general funds for the EDA to use. Additionally, in the establishing resolutions and in that Department of Deed manual and Minnesota Statute 469-096 subdivision 7, it states that this is public money. It must follow a process, a budget process, and be auditable. It must be open to public inspection and scrutiny and be part of the public hearing that we have on the budget. This is taxpayer money, it's not city money. So we cannot, as the EDA, expropriate city funds. We are a separate legal entity that has laws that govern our financial reporting and budgets. If we wanted to do this action, we should have met last year to create a budget. EDA operations are not supposed to be a surprise to the citizens.
Commissioners, a few points of clarity there. The cost for professional services that attended the meeting and prepared the documents are not incurred until a bond is potentially issued. So those are all part of the closing costs as part of that process. That's similar no matter what type of debt the city is issuing. Those costs are not incurred until there's a project or a debt issue to pay for said project. The city has historically not adopted a specific budget for the Economic Development Authority. With the incurrence of this meeting, there is a $25 per meeting stipend for all of you, as adopted through resolution in 1992. That has historically been paid to each of you 5 also serving as council members through the city council budget, which is established and approved as part of the budget process last year. There are more in-depth ways to go about this. The EDA does have the authority to levy taxes upon residents of the community to pay for its budget. It could be appropriated by the city council to pay for its budget, as Councilmember Dunlap explained as well. So if the council and / EDA Board of Commissioners want to request a budget for meeting stipends, meeting supplies, professional services, that can be part of our 2025 budget discussions. But all in said, that comes from the same source as residents, taxpayers, businesses from the community. So ultimately, in our financial statements, the EDA is a component unit. It is a separate entity with authority and powers described by statute, but it is ultimately not formed without the city here to finance it.
So here's the thing that concerns me with that. State statute 469.095, as well as the deed manual and our own establishing resolution, state that commissioners shall be paid for attending regular and special meetings, also reimbursement for actual expenses incurred. All money paid for compensation or reimbursement must be paid out of the EDA's budget,
Madam
Then
Mayor,
we just don't pay ourselves for this meeting.
I
I'm
don't
fine with
want,
taking out.
required by law to pay us.
I'm fine skipping my $25.
so am I.
Mhm.
Jeff, Ryan?
Is it, Madam Mayor, sorry, is it
Mhm.
required by law to be paid for this, to be paid for the EDA? meeting?
I mean, we
that
choose
was-
on our time cards to also write no charge.
Exactly,
Items that we attend
that is correct.
or additional meetings. that-
I do not have to be paid. I am for going at $25 for every meeting. So-
I'm not familiar with the statute that was referenced and haven't had a chance to look at it, but I
If Brian could send that to you
defer
so
to
that
the
we can.
city
all read it.
attorney if there's any legal requirement that council members or board of commissioners are paid for their attendance at a meeting.
I think the statute says that EDA members shall be paid. I'm sure the members could choose to waive that payment if they wanted to. It says they may be reimbursed for actual expenses. They don't have to be.
I
The
mean, we,
council could appropriate
sure.
25 times 5 to pay it at some future time if you wanted to. So there's multiple options. I mean, it says that members, the intent of the statute is to say that rather than being a free service, members of the EDA may be paid. But members could choose to waive that, or the council could choose to appropriate the money at a future meeting.
We've had in the past council members not collect. Correct.
Which kind of emphasizes my point that the EDA is not really seriously existed. It's defunct. This is the first time it's meeting in 4 years.
Wouldn't this be added as needed?
Not according to our establishing resolution, not according to the law. We're required to meet in order to establish a budget on an annual basis. We're required to meet every 2 years in order to identify a depository. We're required to submit our budget to the council so that it can be audited by the state auditor. We're required to give a report to the city council every year on the economic and development conditions of the city. Again, this is kind of the problem when you try to use a loophole to run around the normal process.
Mayor, or Board of Commissioners, it's not a loophole. It's very clear in the state statute, the authority that an economic development authority of this city or any other city has. Bond council has opined that all of the documents, the governing resolution meets the criteria. We're following the process outlined in statute by scheduling a public hearing to establish a proposed development district, and we'll follow statute from here on out. Whatever that means, the next step is the public hearing that you scheduled this evening. And there will be a next step after that we will follow statute.
I understand we might not figure this out right now, but how are we going to follow statute?
In what way?
By having this meeting alone, we are putting the Economic Development Authority into the red. Because we have no budget, because we didn't meet last year to establish a budget that was approved by the city council.
Okay, so the city council has a contingency budget adopted within its general fund budget of $15,000, which is more than enough to meet the stipend for this meeting. The city has other unused funds throughout all of our budget line items that would not put this at a deficit within the general fund in and of itself. If the council and the EDA board want to develop a line item budget for a meeting stipend for 2025 and years thereafter, similar to how you would do the Public Safety Commission, the Planning Commission, the HPC, and the Park and Recreation Commission, staff will be more than welcome to develop a budget, including meeting stipends.
Is there any other comments?
Just one more comment. Kind of along the lines of mixing the funds, I guess. I don't know if that's really the appropriate term, but to me, this is supposed to be part of an auditable process. It's supposed to be included in our annual meeting that is a public hearing where the residents can come and speak and make their points heard on how we're handling this budget, including the EDA budget. So the fact that that hasn't been done and now we're just going to appropriate funds for the EDA to do business that it really should have planned to do concerns me. I'm looking for the reference. So on the idea that the money can just sort of be mixed in that blending component, statute 469.100, as well as the deed manual, and again, our own establishing resolution say that the financial statements of the authority must be prepared, audited, filed, and published or posted in the manner required for the financial statements of the city that establish the authority. The financial statements must permit comparison and reconciliation with the city's accounts and financial reports. The report must be filed with the state auditor by June 30th of each year. The auditor shall review the report and may accept it, or in the public interest, audit the books of the authority.
Again,
There's-
the finances of the Economic Development Authority are blended in, by definition, as a blended component unit within the city of Otsego. So any financial of the Economic Development Authority would therefore also be reported within the city's financial statements. The city's financial statements are an agenda item on the 7 o'clock meeting and would include that activity from 2023 if there were any, and will include it in 2024. The OSA, the Office of the State Auditor report, is due by June 30th and is the same report that we would submit for the city because it's a blended component unit.
I would just say, going forward, in order to permit comparison and reconciliation, I think looking at it as a blended component unit, it might need to be reconsidered, especially if we're just going to be taking money from the city.
That's not really up to the city to determine whether it's a blended component unit. Those are rules of GAAP, so generally accepted accounting principles for government finance.
So if it's treated as a blended component unit, then how can we comply with the law that permits comparison and reconciliation?
Because the financial data would be recorded within that same set of financial statements and would be able to be used to compare year over year.
I'm not following, but
I would have been more than welcome to answer these questions, but again, I had no preparation for any of these specific statutes or references to be able to try and show you within our financial statements or any of the EDA Board of Commissioners how this transaction for 5 meeting stipends would be recorded, which line item it would show up in the financial statements, how that flows through to the reporting to the state auditor, how it interacts with our budget.
yeah,
And we did ask at the last meeting
If you had
specifically
questions,
that if we had
Right.
questions, we were supposed to reach out.
I sent some questions, but after the discussion, I'm now looking at some of the notes that I've taken, and it says that the item later in the meeting, which is, I guess I'll bring it up then, but
would you feel better having a meeting before July 22nd to discuss how we're gonna pay ourselves or not pay ourselves?
I think we should, I've looked at several sources, what I would consider to be the authority on these issues. I've not seen anywhere where it says you don't have to follow the law if you don't want to.
Why wouldn't you do that?
I don't have to, I don't have to take
The
their money.
$25.
It's my choice. It's not a lot. That's not a lot. You have to be paid for being a council member. You can say you didn't come to this meeting if you wanted to. Well, not this. You don't have, you can write no charge. You don't have to pay yourself.
I'm confused by your argument.
I'm confused by your argument. You're telling us that we have to be paid for having an EDA meeting.
Look, I'm not telling you. It's in our establishing resolution, which I made sure every council member got before this meeting.
Board,
Yeah.
Commissioners, President. The concern seems to be stemming from that there's no line item budget specifically for meeting stipends, right? And so the city council, for a reason, adopts a contingency budget to identify resources to be used for things that have not been planned out sufficiently in the budget process. This would qualify. This is a decision of the city council, not of the Board of Commissioners, on whether they want to pay and appropriate the funds for a meeting stipend to the EDA Board of Commissioners.
So we can do that moving forward.
At a future council meeting, we can separate it as a specific line item, and the council can specifically approve appropriating funds to the Economic Development Authority to pay for meeting stipends for this meeting and any future meetings if you so choose.
Thank you, Adam, for your knowledge as the financial administrator.
All right.
Do we have a motion and a second for
We do
adjourn?
not
We
have
do.
that motion. We were still under some discussion. Does anyone else have anything? Otherwise, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So move.
Second,
Motion by Tina, seconded by Brittany. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Meeting is ended. Thank you all for attending.